Okay, can you see the loon?
Yes. Yep.
Great. Okay, I can no longer see anything else on my screen except the presentation. So, so we'll go ahead. But yeah, I can't see myself and I can't see
Please
anything
log
else.
off.
So if anything happens, you'll have to let me know.
Will
Um,
do.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm really excited to be here and to deliver this presentation. My name, as Aileen said, my name is Denise Silphy. I'm the Director of Programs and Communications at the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. Um, and tonight I'm going to talk about what we mean when we say that common loons are environmental sentinels. So first, before we jump right in, the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation, our mission is to inspire a passion for and the conservation of Adirondack loons. And we do that through a series of research, conservation, and outreach initiatives. So these are our three main areas of focus. And this presentation is part of that, is part of that outreach. So what's so great or what's so cool about loons? If I could see you and ask you this question, I have a feeling you might say a couple things. Loons have really distinct calls that are incredibly unique. And if once you hear one and you know it's a loon, you'll never forget it. They also have really distinct patterning in their breeding season. So when they're here in the Adirondacks, this is during their breeding season when they are black and white, so they stand out and they're very distinct. There's lots of other really interesting things about loons. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about loons generally, and then about what it means to be an environmental sentinel and how we use that for our research. So first, loons are part of the Gavidae family, which is a very old family of birds. They evolved to their common form about 10 to 20 million years ago. And there are 5 species of loon, and they're all northern hemisphere species. So they all live in the northern hemisphere. And the common loons that we see here in the Adirondacks are actually the only ones that come this far south to breed. All the other species of loons breed north of us, many of them in the tundra off of Canada and Alaska and sometimes the Eurasian continent. So the other species of loon are the Pacific loon, the Arctic loon, the red-throated loon, and the yellow-billed loon. And again, these all are much further north of us. The common loon is the only one that breeds this far south. And if you look at this map, you can see the red color shows where common loons breed during the summer. And you'll see that the red only extends to some northern states in the US. Most common loons breed in Canada. So we feel really lucky that we have them here in the Adirondacks. You can also see them in some other northern states, like the New England states, as well as Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And there's small populations in Montana, Wyoming, and Washington. So the Adirondack loon life cycle, the common loons, which the ones that are here in the Adirondacks, we call them Adirondack loons. They are migratory birds, so they spend half their life on the ocean and half their life on freshwater during the summer months. So in the winter, when they're on the ocean, they actually look different also. They will molt all of their black and white breeding plumage in the fall, and the feathers that they grow in the winter are gray or silver. So, and then they spend the winter on the coast. They can go anywhere on the coast from Maine to Florida. We have no idea how they choose where they go on the ocean, but once they choose a spot, they go there repeatedly. They go to the same spot every year. Many of our Adirondack loons, we think, probably don't go too far to the ocean. We think they mostly go off the coast of Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. But we have had some of our banded loons appear in Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. So they will go anywhere, and we don't know why or how they choose that. I always tell people that if you are on the ocean during the winter months, you might see loons and not know it because they don't look the same. They are gray or silver. In the spring, loons will migrate back to the Adirondacks sometime in March or April. Really depends on when ice out occurs, but they will reliably come back within 3 days of ice out. Um, and again, that's one of those things that we don't know how they know that or how they figure that out, but it's a pretty reliable metric. The male loons will come back first, and the female loons will sometimes come back a week or so later. And then once they're here, in the summer is when they are meeting up with their mates, they're nesting, they're hopefully hatching chicks and hopefully fledging those chicks before they repeat the cycle and go back to the ocean. So when they first arrive in the Adirondacks in March or April, um, loons will try to go back to the same nesting territories that they used previously. They like to nest in the same locations over and over again if they can. Male loons are the ones who choose the nesting territory, and they will choose one that is either, if they can, they will choose the same place where they were born. But there's a good likelihood that that territory will be taken by their parents or some other loon. So they will look for a nesting site that has the same characteristics as the place where they were born. So the males will choose the site, the females will join them there, and then they will spend a little bit of a time getting reacquainted with each other. Loons do not mate for life, but they are long-term monogamous. So they, over the course of their life, they might have and on average 4 different mates, but they do tend to stay together for long term. So they will find each other. Their courtship is very subtle. They swim in circles. They dip their bills in the water. They hoot to each other. Um, as they get reacquainted with each other. And then when it's time, they will build a nest. Both the male and the female loons contribute to building the nest. And then once the female is ready to lay eggs, she will usually lay 2 eggs, and she will lay them asynchronously, which means that she will lay the first egg and then 24 hours later lay the second egg. And then the male and the female loon will also take turns incubating the eggs. So they really co-parent equally, and take care of building the nest, incubating the eggs, and then later caring for the chicks. You'll see that the nests, or loon nests, are always right on the edge of the water. And that is because loons can't walk on land, so they need to build their nests right on the edge of the water so that they can flop in and out of the nest easily to get back into the water. So this also, of course, makes them more vulnerable to things like heavy rain or water level rises. But this is a requirement for loons, that the nest has to be within easy reach of the water. When it is time for the eggs to hatch, it will be about 28 days of incubation, and then the eggs will hatch asynchronously as well, meaning that the first egg laid will hatch first, and then the second egg will hatch a day or so later. This means that one chick is often larger and older than the other. Um, and it means that as they start to grow and start to get bigger, that they might practice something called sibling rivalry, which means that the bigger chick will pick on the smaller chick, and sometimes the smaller chick will not survive because of that. So that can be a really hard thing for people who love to watch loons to see or to know. But it is a very, very natural part of loon biology, and it's quite common with other predatory birds. And it makes sure that the parents are devoting all of their energy to the chick that is the strongest and the most likely to survive. So when the chicks hatch, the first 2 weeks of their life is arguably, and in my biased opinion, the best time, and when they are the absolute cutest. They're very small, and this is when they will ride on their parents' backs, which is always a lovely sight to see. They can only ride on their parents' backs for about 2 weeks, because then they will get too big, and then their parents will kick them off if they try to climb on their parents' backs. But riding on the parents' backs, it serves a couple purposes. One, it can help the chicks rest when they're very small and newly hatched. Trying to keep up with their parents takes a lot of energy. So being able to climb on their parents' back and take a nap helps them save some of that energy. It also helps them thermoregulate, so they can control their body temperature better by going on their parents' back, maybe going under a wing to get warm. And it also helps protect them from predators. So the main predators of loon chicks are, of course, eagles and other birds of prey, but also large fish that will swallow a loon chick whole. And unfortunately, we do have photos of that too. It's kind of fascinating, but it's always sad to know or to see. So riding on the parent's back is what will help protect the chicks from those types of predators. And then the chicks are considered fledged when they reach 11 weeks old. As they grow, they will lose their black feathers, and they will grow in these gray feathers that look very similar to adult loons in the winter. The juvenile chicks will keep these gray or silver feathers for the first 4 years of their life. until they are ready to breed, and then they will start growing in the black and white feathers for the breeding season when it's time and when they're ready. So at 11 weeks, when the chicks are fledged, that means they are technically capable of flight. They might not actually be very good at it yet, but they technically can fly, and you will see them practicing on lakes. You'll see them kind of trying to fly across the water, and then usually they won't take off right away. They might do this for a while. They also are practicing how to take care of themselves. So the parents will often leave the chicks around this time, and the parents will go start socializing with other adult loons, while the juveniles get used to being on their own and to being independent, and fishing for themselves and feeding themselves and generally taking care of themselves. So 11 weeks is the goal. That's where we want to see loon chicks get to, because then they have, it's kind of like hitting one of those landmark moments in their life where after this they have a little bit better chance of survival. So why do we study loons? There's all kinds of things that make loons excellent research subjects, um, such as the fact that they're long lived. They can live to be 30 to 40 years old, which is great for research because that means we can track them for several decades of their lives. But the big thing that makes loons such great research subjects is that they're considered environmental sentinels. And what we mean when we say environmental sentinels is that they are a species that reflects the overall condition of the environment where they live. So by studying loons, we can get a good sense of how healthy our freshwater lake ecosystems are. And we can also use environmental sentinel species to predict potential impacts to human health. So loons are great environmental sentinel species, because we can locate them pretty well, and because they're pretty easy for us to observe. If you have a animal that you are trying to learn about the environment and they are hard to find, that's going to be harder for research. So the fact that loons are so charismatic, and that live pretty well in lakes where there are lots of people, means that we know we can find them and we can learn a lot about the health of the ecosystem by following them and researching them. Another term that usually is often thrown around is biological indicators, which means basically the same thing as being an environmental sentinel. It means that this is a species that we can learn about overall ecosystem health from, and potential impacts to human health. So whenever I talk about environmental sentinels, some people ask me, is a sentinel species or an environmental sentinel species the same as a keystone species? And they are not. So I'm going to just take a slide here to explain how the two are different. But both types of species serve really important roles in their environments, but for different reasons. So a keystone species is one that if it is removed from the environment, the entire ecosystem can start to collapse. And that is not loons, right? We have a lot of healthy freshwater lakes that don't have loons on them. So loons not being on a lake does not mean the ecosystem is going to collapse. However, there are species that, if they are removed, do cause collapse. And there are a couple kinds of keystone predators, or keystone species, that I'll tell you about really quick here. One is keystone predators, like wolves. Wolves are native to New York State, but we don't have them here anymore, or we don't find them here anymore. But we know that when keystone predators are removed from an ecosystem, it can throw all of the other species out of whack. And one way we see this is that we have an awful lot of white-tailed deer in New York, and for several different reasons, but one of them being that they don't have as many natural predators anymore. So the presence of predators, not only do they eat deer, for example, or they eat prey species, but also just the presence of predators causes prey species to behave differently, in ways that we have found that are incredibly important. So, for example, when there are wolves, then animals like deer move around more, and they behave they're more wary of their environment. So they don't do things like overgraze a section of forest. So predators are really important, and keystone predators like gray wolves, mountain lions are another one, are really important to helping keep all of the other species in the ecosystem kind of in a balance. Another kind is a keystone prey species. And again, these are animals that if they're removed from their ecosystem, it can actually change the landscape. So an example of a keystone prey species is an American bison. Um, American bison are actually, we always associate them with grasslands in the Midwest, and we actually need bison to have healthy grasslands. When bison are absent from their environment, the grassland integrity itself goes down. Bison, just by moving through the grassland, are turning up the soil. They're fertilizing the soil, they're eating grasses, and they're dispersing seeds in ways that keep grasslands in existence. When these big species go away, grasslands actually become woody forests. So an animal like a bison as a keystone prey species is important for the predators in that region, but also really important for the earth and the landscape itself. Another one is ecological engineers, which a great example of that is a beaver. So beavers we know can maybe be considered nuisance animals to some people for damming up water and causing water to pool. However, we have found that if we do not have animals like beavers, we actually lose fresh water. So, for example, about like 100 years, 150 years ago, when beavers were almost hunted to extinction, the amount of fresh water available on the North American continent went down by about 25%, because beavers creating all these dams and creating water to pool is actually how we are, storing fresh water in the ecosystem. So they're really important as well. And the last one is mutualists. So these species are ones that depend on each other. And if one goes away, the other one can go away. So a really good example is bees and flowering plants. Something like 90% of all flowering plants depend on bees as a pollinator. So if we lose bees, we stand to lose an awful lot of flowering plants that depend on them because they are mutually entwined. So I bring this all up because one, I think it's really interesting, and two, it's a question I get asked a lot, is that a sentinel species must mean that they are a keystone species, and that's just not quite the case. So in New York, just as a little kind of recap, in New York, keystone species, or ones that are disproportionately important for a healthy ecosystem, include willows, mountain lions, gray wolves, and beavers, whereas sentinel species, or ones that tell us about the health of the environment, include sugar maples, common loons, salamanders, and snapping turtles. So both of these types of species are incredibly important, but they play slightly different roles. So how do we use loons to learn about the health of the environment? The big thing that we are doing research on, or using loons for research, is to monitor the presence of environmental pollutants. And the number one pollutant that we look at is mercury. So mercury is released into the atmosphere through emissions burning. And then it's in the air, and then it gets into our precipitation cycle, and then it returns to the earth as rain. And it gets into our freshwater lakes, where it becomes methyl mercury, which is a neurotoxin that is harmful to everything. So methyl mercury is harmful for people. This is why there are limits on how many fish you're supposed to eat, depending on where you are and where you're fishing. But usually different states put out recommendations for how many fish you should or should not eat in a given time period to help or to try to help reduce the amount of mercury you accumulate in your body. And methyl mercury, it has the same bad effects for loons as well. So again, it's a neurotoxin, which means it starts to affect the neurological system. In loons, what we see when they have too much mercury in their system is they start to not take care of their chicks properly. They don't defend their territories very well. They don't feed their chicks or feed themselves very well, and they ultimately just fail to thrive. And they can die if they have too much mercury in their systems. And they also can, if they have enough mercury, it can be impossible for them to reproduce. So mercury is something that we're concerned about generally for both wildlife and water quality and human health. Um, Again, just some of the sources of mercury. There are some natural sources of mercury in volcanic eruptions, which are things we can't control, but they don't happen very often. So Mercury can be released in a volcanic eruption. It can also be released in naturally occurring forest fires. However, a lot of the mercury that is going into our system now is caused by human behaviors, namely from electric plants and fossil fuel burning plants, sometimes and also from exhaust from cars, from some agricultural practices, sometimes from landfills. So uh, mercury enters the system in a lot of different ways now. So it's really impossible to control once it's in the system. So the reason that loons are excellent environmental indicators of pollutants like mercury is that they are top predators. So in their freshwater ecosystems, loons, nothing much preys on an adult loon. Loon chicks have predators, but adult loons really don't have many. They can get injured, or they can get, they can be attacked by another animal, but nothing. Loons are not the prey species for any other predator in their freshwater ecosystems. However, a loon will eat everything that's in the lake if they can fit it down their throat. They are very opportunistic feeders, and they will feed on many different kinds of fish and different kinds of invertebrates. So they are considered top predators here in the Adirondacks. And that means that because they are eating everything in the lake, it means that any pollutants in the water will accumulate more in their bodies than any other species in the lake. So we call this process biomagnification and bioaccumulation, which just means that when there's a pollutant in a water source, everything in the water source will accumulate some of that pollutant, but then the top predators that feed on everything below it will end up accumulating the most of that pollutant. So when we study loons, we are using them to tell us about the overall amount of mercury in a water source. And we do that and have been doing that for a long time a relatively long time at this point. We have been using loons to monitor the presence of mercury since 1998, when the Loon Center's founder, Dr. Nina Schock, started working with Biodiversity Research Institute to monitor loons in the Adirondacks or in New York generally for mercury. So BRI, or Biodiversity Research Institute, has been monitoring mercury in loons across many states for several decades at this point. But in the 90s, Dr. Schock realized that loons in New York were not part of that study. And the Adirondacks has a pretty good population of loons. So she brought that research to New York. At the time, we have sampled mercury, taken blood and feather samples to test for mercury from anywhere from 500 to 600 loons. And also, when we take those samples, we then band them, which means we can then follow those loons over the course of their life to learn more about them. So how do we capture loons and band them and take blood and feather samples? Well, Loon Banding Week is kind of a holiday around the Loon Center. It is actually starting this weekend. We will have our Loon Banding Week begin, I believe, on Saturday and go for 8 days. And what that means is that all of our researchers they work at night. So they work all night on banding week. They don't work during the day. They sleep during the day. But they go out at night because that makes it easier for them to catch loons. So loons have excellent vision. So they can see you coming if you try to capture them in the daylight, and you will not catch them if they don't want to be caught. They're very fast. They can dive deep into the water, and they can outrun us or outswim us. But if we go out at night, if our researchers go out at night and use a spotlight, kind of like deer spotting, they can use the spotlight to locate a loon and to temporarily blind it so the loon can't see the boat. And then they will play the sounds of loon calls. They'll play chick calls to bring in the adults, and they'll play adult calls to bring in the chicks. And it works really well that when the light is in the loon's eyes and you're playing the loon calls, the loons will swim right up to the boat. And if all goes well, our researchers can just scoop them up in a net and bring them on board and then take them back to shore, where we take some measurements to record some of the overall health indicators for the loons. We want to make sure, we weigh them, making sure that their body composition seems to be in good health. And then we also take feather samples and blood samples, and those are what we're going to send away to be tested for mercury, to track the levels of mercury in different lakes across the Adirondacks. And then, as I mentioned, we also band the loons before we release them. So each banded loon gets 4 bands, 3 colored bands, and 1 silver USGS band. So that's 2 bands per leg. And the combinations of the colors are unique to each loon. So as when we release the loon and they go about their life, when we spot those loons again, we can kind of record where they are, maybe any changes to them. And if we capture them again and take mercury samples again, we can compare mercury levels from when they were previously captured to the current capture. So you might see banded loons. We have several hundred of them in the Adirondacks, and you can see the bands if you have binoculars or a good camera. So what have we learned from some of this mercury research so far? We've learned a couple things that stand out to us. One is, you can see from this chart, male loons are represented in blue and female loons are represented in red. And you can see that the male loons regularly have more or higher mercury levels in their blood samples than females. So male loons accumulate more mercury than female loons. We think that one reason that this happens is because, one reason is because male loons are larger and they do eat a lot more. But we also think that, or we also have learned that female loons can shed mercury when they lay eggs. So we can test eggs for mercury levels also. So when the female lays an egg, some of the mercury she's accumulated in her body will be passed into that egg, meaning that it helps her keep her levels lower. But it also means that a chick can be hatched or can hatch and already have mercury in its system before it's even really had much time on the water. So this is one thing we've learned. We've also learned, if you look at the locations listed across the bottom, on the left, we start in Alaska and we move east to New Brunswick. And you can see that the levels rise as we move east. So we have learned that this means that a lot of the mercury emissions that are accumulating here in the east are actually probably coming from the Midwest or maybe even further west, where there are far more fossil fuel burning plants. And they travel east on the prevailing winds. So a lot of the mercury that is in the water here in the Adirondacks didn't start here, which is important because it shows us that this is not a problem that we can solve state by state. This is something that, we need to look at collectively. Another thing that we have learned is that around 2010, you can see the trend here in this line that was gradually going up and then starts to plateau around 2010. This means that mercury levels stopped rising around 2010 and they plateaued and they've been stable. So this shows us that clean air regulation has worked. All the way back to the 1970s with the Clean Air Act. It takes a while from when regulations are imposed to when we can see the results. But we can see that, and we can assume that reducing emissions has worked, and mercury levels have not been accumulating quite as quickly, and maybe in some places not at all in the last couple decades. So this is important because it shows us that we can make positive change. However, we can't remove mercury from the lakes once it's there. Once it's in the water, it's there. We're not even sure how long it's there, but probably for longer than any of our lifetimes. If mercury will eventually settle in the sediment at the bottom of lakes and can kind of be stored there. But it's always in the system. So this helps us understand that the clean air regulations have worked. It also points out or makes us aware that, when there is talk of removing or rolling back some of those regulations, we will expect to see, if that happens, we will expect to see mercury begin increasing again. So once our loons are banded and we've taken their samples, we then hire every summer several summer lake monitors. This year, I believe we have 28 or 29 lake monitors, and these are folks who are hired for the summer to go out and they monitor our banded loons to see what happens to them. So this is another little facet of our research, is we want to know how loons or we want to know how the mercury levels are in Adirondack lakes, but we also want to learn about loons generally and observe them and see how other conditions are affecting their ability to survive here in the Adirondack. So our lake monitors collect a lot of observational data for us by watching our banded loons. And I mentioned that you can see bands on loons. It's not easy. It can be really tricky. But with binoculars and some practice, you can see the bands just under the water surface, because loons' legs do face backwards on their body. Sometimes you can see them just under the surface of the water. And then also loons do a lot of funny things like this. This is called a foot wag. And it's a behavior that loons do surprisingly often. It's one of my favorites because it's just kind of silly looking. But loons will often hold a leg out of the water. Maybe they'll stretch or they are trying to regulate their body temperature. Loons thermoregulate through their legs. So by keeping their legs in the water versus removing them and putting them in the air, they can adjust the temperature of their body. So because they do this, it gives us a chance to see the bands. So, oh, and also our lake monitors, they will monitor nest success. And if there is abandoned nests like this one, they are trained in how to determine if a nest has been abandoned, and then they are trained in how to collect eggs. And we will also send eggs to be tested for mercury to see, again, if levels of mercury are higher or rising in certain areas, and potentially to determine if that's what's, maybe causing our eggs not to hatch. So far, we have not found that here in New Brunswick. They did have such high levels of mercury that the loons were not able to reproduce. And we have not found that the mercury is high enough for that yet. But we can check the eggs, and it helps us gather more information. So some other things that we are learning about environmental health from studying loons. We currently study the effects of climate change on Adirondack lakes. And we can see how different changes in the climate are impacting loons, and this helps us understand how to best maybe help loons, but also understand how our lake ecosystems are changing. So one of the number one things that is impacting loons is that as the climate warms, we are getting heavier or harsher storms. And that's bringing heavier rainfall in shorter amounts of time and causing lots of lake water rise and sudden rises in water, to the point where nests are flooding and we lose nests due to high water. In 2024, nest flooding was actually the number one cause of nest failure in the Adirondacks. And that was a summer where we had a lot of rainstorms, a lot of very heavy rains, a lot of water falling in very short amount of time. And as you can see in this nest camera photo at the top here, this was a nest that in the series of photos that we can see, you can see that the nest was fine. And then there was a heavy storm and the water started rising. It actually is kind of sad because the adult loon was trying to add sticks to the nest to try to keep the water out and was not able to keep up with the water level rise. And this nest did fail. This was in 2021. And this is just an example where we got to see what was happening because we had a nest cam or a wildlife camera positioned on this nest. So one of the ways that we can help loons in places where they are chronically losing nests to water level rise is we can deploy nest rafts, which is in the bottom photo. And this is one of our big conservation efforts. We really try not to intervene as much as we can with wild animals. We want them to have the freedom to be wild. But if there is something that like water level rise that loons can't control, we can't control. Um, we can help them by giving them a nest draft that will rise and fall with the water level rise, and can help them successfully nest. So we have several nest drafts deployed in very strategic places, and it has been proving to be very helpful. We just had our first successful chick hatch off of a nest draft in Lake Clear here in Saranac Lake. So we were very excited about that. And the loons seem to adapt to it pretty well. We do have to deploy these very carefully, because if you put too many nest drafts out, you're actually increasing desirable nesting territory, and then you get more loon fights, more territorial fights, and nesting success goes down. So it's a very delicate balance, and our research biologists, they will look into each location and determine if it's a good fit. Um, but this is one of the big ways that how we are researching and what we are learning about loons and their ecosystems, and a way that we can try to help. We also monitor loons just to see how different human disturbances affect or don't affect them. Loons are very good at living with people. So they can live on lakes that have a lot of boat traffic, and with a lot of shoreline development. But we're always kind of monitoring and watching and learning about, what are the thresholds for where loons can live successfully with people. And another big one is looking at water clarity, and using loons to indicate whether water clarity in our lakes is becoming an issue or not. And that is because loons, as I said, they're visual. They have excellent vision, and they rely on their vision to hunt. So they actually can't feed properly if lakes are not, or if the lakes are too cloudy. So we are looking at different things, like how different boat uses might affect water clarity, and how this might affect loons and the prey species they rely on. So all of this makes loons a species of special concern in New York State. This is a special designation, meaning that they are protected in New York State. It is illegal to interfere with them or to harm them, because the state recognizes that they're really important for us to understand, or they're a really important element for us understanding the health of our lake systems. So, what can you do for loons, or what can you do to help loons? There's a couple things that you can do just to help live peacefully with the loons on your lakes. One, we always advocate for everyone to respect all wildlife. And the big way to do that is to observe them from a distance. We really want people to watch loons. We want people to go out in their boats and be near loons. But what we do ask is for people not to chase loons with their boats. Give loons some distance or some space. We usually recommend about 100 feet, maybe a little bit more if it's a loon family with small chicks. But basically, if your presence is causing loons or any animal to change their behavior, then you're too close. So we ask you to give them a little more room. Loons, if you give them enough space, they're really curious, and often they will swim over and check you out. And if loons approach you, that's okay. We say enjoy that moment. We just ask people not to chase loons to try to get a better view. That can cause stress, and especially if there's small chicks that can't dive, you can be forcing adult loons to make difficult choices between staying with their chicks or diving underwater to protect themselves. So this is one of the big things that you can do for loons, is just enjoy observing them, but give them enough space. We also ask people not to approach or touch loon nests. It is kind of amazing how many pictures from our nest cameras we get back of people reaching into loon nests and picking up the eggs. And I'm not sure why so many people want to do that, but we have an awful lot of photos of people just getting really close. We understand that people are curious. Loon eggs are interesting. They're large and they're brown, and you can see them, and it's interesting to check them out. However, if you are approaching loon nests or touching loon eggs, you're increasing or potentially guaranteeing that those eggs will fail. So we do ask people to give loon nests more space, so that they can have a chance to hatch and survive. We also ask people to use non-lead fishing gear. I have a whole other presentation I can give at some point about how lead poisoning from lead fishing tackle is the primary cause of human-caused death for common loons everywhere. That is on the entire continent of North America. Lead poisoning is a leading cause of death. And it's also a very preventable one. There's lots of non-lead fishing tackle options, and we ask people to make the choice to use those and still enjoy all of your time out fishing, but you are making it significantly safer for loons and other wildlife because lead is toxic to all living things. You can also report injured loons to the Loon Center. We will assess the situation and do our best to capture injured loons, especially loons that have been tangled in fishing line, or if loons appear very, very ill, potentially from lead poisoning. Then we try to intervene to make sure that we understand what's happening. So you can call the Loon Center and we will work with you to assess the situation and come up with a response. You can also just spread the word by, telling other people about how to respectfully recreate with loons. And then you can support our work. We are a very small nonprofit. All of our funding comes from federal and state grants and donations from our supporters. So it really is the best way to help make sure that we can keep doing the work we're doing. And then other ways to get involved. The Lake Luzerne has a great loon-friendly lakes program. If you're not already involved, you can see how to get involved in that program there. If you're on a different lake and don't have a loon-friendly lakes program, you can reach out to me and I can talk to you about how to join this environmental stewardship program, which is the whole goal is to help support groups who want to become good stewards of their lakes and help educate other people about how to be good stewards of their lakes. And we support you with trainings and supplies and some guidance. And then you can be certified as a loon-friendly lake and kind of send the message to others that you take your lake stewardship very seriously. We also have a new boat impact study that relies on community science volunteers. You can conduct boat surveys for our boat impact study. You can participate in the New York Annual Loon Census, which is coming up on July 18th. It's from 8 to 9 a.m., always the third Saturday in July, where we have hundreds of volunteers who go out and just count loons for 1 hour. And that helps us create a snapshot of the total loon population in New York State. And then the last thing is we have a new New York Loon observation reporting tool on our website, which is a map that you can click on to report where you have spotted loons and loon nests. So we are going to use this to create an interactive map where people can see where loons are or where, general areas where loons have been spotted. And again, just help people understand the overall loon population. So all of these things can be found, more information can be found on our website, which is adkloon.org. You can always contact me, Denise, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions or direct you to the person who can answer them. And again, thank you so much for attending this presentation. Thank you for your support. It really makes a difference for Loons, and it makes a difference for the work we do. So I appreciate that. And now I'm going to figure out how to unshare my screen in Teams.
Thank you, Denise. While
There we go.
if you have time for some questions.
Yeah, I have time for questions.
Okay, great. So maybe we'll start with the people in the audience in person first, and then see if anybody virtually wants to put any questions into the chat. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Go ahead.
How much does boat wakes influence where they'll have a nest or not?
Oh, so that's a great question. So our boat impact study is looking at that actually right now. We know that loons like to nest in the same spot over and over and over again, and they actually will keep nesting there sometimes a long time, even if their nest is failing, before they will try to change their location. But if they are in a spot where there is a lot of large boat wakes, it can easily flood the nest and wash the eggs away, or flood the nest and just make the eggs non-viable because it changes the temperature. And we're trying to, our boat impact study, a big part of that is to try to learn more about how big of an issue that is. We know it can happen. If people are using regular motorized boats and they are going, staying about 200 feet from shore or going at slow speeds when they are near the shoreline, that tends to be just fine, and doesn't create too big of a wake. But certain boats that are meant to create very large wakes, like wake boats for surfing, wave surfing, those are kind of newer to the Adirondack. So we're trying to understand if they are having an impact on loon nests or not. So I don't have an exact answer for you, but it's something that we're trying to get a better picture of.
Kurt?
A little strange, but I've always wondered if there are any behavioral tells for a loon parent which has lost its chick.
Okay, I think I'm just going to repeat the question to make sure I heard it correctly. Asking about behavioral tells for a loon that has lost its chick.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. So I think I don't know of any. If you mean like when you see a loon without a chick, can you tell if they've recently lost a chick? There's no behavioral tells that I am aware of. I do know we've had one of our lake monitors actually has observed a loon. He unfortunately had to collect 2 dead loon chicks that were hit by jet skis on the lake he was monitoring. So he collected them to bring into us, and he put them on the front of his kayak so he could paddle in. And the parent loon followed him the whole way in, wailing the whole way. So that's a really sad story, but I think it stands out to me because it shows me that loons do recognize when they've lost their chicks, but there's not a clear way for us to know that unless we've seen it kind of happen, if that makes sense. I don't know of any behavior that they exhibit maybe a day or a couple days later, other than they often will just move away from the nest area. If they lose a chick or lose their nest, the 2 adults will often just start kind of behaving as if they haven't had a chick or a nest, and sometimes it's because they're going to re-nest. So they will kind of regroup and then they might try to nest again. But those are the only behaviors I'm aware of that I've seen.
Anybody else? Sure.
You mentioned the environmental impact studies of loons nesting, and the example you gave was the increase in rainfall. I'm curious, was there ever a time like pre-industrial New York State where the loon nesting areas were actually farther south or a different place?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I have another presentation that's about climate change specifically, and in that one, I show a map that says, I think the map goes back about 130 or 120 some years, and just that recently, you could find loons in Pennsylvania. So loons did breed and they were nesting further south, as recently as 100 some years ago. And gradually those territories have all increased or gone northward. We think that some of this is a climate cause, but we also think it could also be because some of those areas have become more developed than others, more quickly. But yeah, we know that you could find loons in Northern California, in Iowa, in Indiana, in Pennsylvania. So the nesting territory has incrementally moved northward.
Anybody else? Yes, Denise, a question in the chat. When do the chicks eventually leave the parents? Is it that 11-week time frame?
Yep, at about 11 weeks, sometimes 12 weeks, but once chicks are 11 weeks old, we expect the parents to start to leave them behind. And this is when the parents actually become really social. They're very territorial when they have the chicks, and they will fight other loons. But once they determine the chicks are good to go, they can take care of themselves, the parents will usually leave and go to a different lake. And then you'll see them start grouping up in large groups of other adult loons. And it's usually right around the 11-week time frame, sometimes 12 weeks, but that's when we expect to see that happen.
If anybody else virtually wants to add anything else to the chat, do you guys have anything? Well, thank you, Denise. We really appreciate you coming. I'm just gonna tie some of what the Lake Association is doing
Great.
from what you talked about. So the Lake Luzerne Association, as I mentioned, is part of the Loon Friendly Lakes program. But what that means in reality in our day-to-day is a couple of points in the lake, we have some of the fishing line recycling containers set up. We have 2 at Wayside and 1 at Silver Bridge. So we really encourage folks to use those, but please don't put any debris into those. They are getting clogged extremely quickly that I can't keep up with keeping them clear, and then nobody is able to put fishing line into them. Alongside those containers are some signs with some basic information about loons, including if any loons are in distress or are being harassed. There's a number at the bottom that you can call. I believe, Denise, those are for DEC, right?
Yes, the old signs have mostly DEC numbers on them. I have been waiting since February to get my new
Oh.
signs approved.
I
And then
know.
they will have the Loon Center phone number, DEC phone number, and North Country Wild Care phone number.
Okay,
But
great.
DEC is a great switchboard. If you call them, they will direct you to the correct place. So it still works.
And then ACLC also does trainings for folks that want to be part of their network, to be reached out to if there is a loon in distress. My sister and I have done that. I'm trained in the winter and the summer rescue. So if any loons in this area, or I also live part-time in New York City, get stranded, which they often do, then you can get an alert and then potentially help them respond in those areas, which is great. Denise, I don't think that we have a lot of folks in this area that are trained
Okay.
right now. So if any of you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about that, I can just tell you about my training experience with it. I thankfully have not had to respond to any wounds. I hope I never have to, but it is just nice to know that there's somebody available locally to do that. And then she mentioned issues with lead. There is a tackle box ambassador training that ACLC does, which is really great. Part of that program is that folks are able to bring their tackle boxes in to be evaluated, and then their lead tackle can be pulled out and traded in for a voucher towards bait shops in the area that are participating in the program. So I recently became trained in that. We are hoping to have some exchange tables set up over the summer, and some of my Lake Association colleagues are going to be getting trained as well. So if you guys are interested in getting trained or want to set up an appointment with us to have one of us go through your tackle box, just let us know. And then we also have an email address that we just set up, luzerneloons@gmail.com. If you guys notice any comings and goings of the loons, anything that you think might be of note, that's really helpful for us to know. Some of the things we're interested in finding out about is when they first arrive, when they depart in the fall. If you notice a chick is born, maybe if you're the first one to notice it, things like that would be cool for us to know. Unfortunately, some of the things I'm interested in knowing, I don't want to know, but it's good for us to know, is negative interactions that they have with humans on the lake. Oftentimes I see people post about that in the local Lake Luzerne Facebook group, and I do screenshots of that for us to be keeping track of. That's something helpful for us to know as well, because sometimes the loons have unsuccessful nesting seasons. So that could be an indication of that. Thankfully, this year we do have a chick that's probably only a week, give or take, old, still riding on the parent's back right now. But in the past few days, I've seen them get approached by multiple people, and extremely stressful to watch happen. As Denise said, sometimes the adults will end up abandoning the chicks in an effort to get away. And so that's something that we really want to avoid. So please feel free to encourage people not to get that close to the loons. If you're somebody who prefers literature rather than having interactions with people, we have a table in the back with some information about that you can just have for yourself to become more familiar, or to give to other people you think might be interested. And Denise, is there anything else that you guys want to plug?
No, that's great. You're doing so many great things. We actually came and presented at your high school recently,
Yes.
just a couple weeks ago. We're really excited to go back in the fall. So yeah, we love working with Lake Luzerne, and we're very excited for everything you're doing. So
That reminds me, I don't know if Jane discussed with you, but our high school students are going to participate in the boat study as well.
that's awesome. Super
Yeah.
cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. And feel free to reach out to me if you need anything. The easiest email address to reach me at is education@adkloon.org.
Okay,
So
thank you, good night.
thank you.
Thank you. The association already, we have some membership forms in the back. And if you have any questions about our testing and things like that, Kurt and Mike are the best to talk to about that. I don't know much about that. I did just recently get trained, but I haven't done it yet, so.